Okay. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. As Rabbi Goodman and my friend and colleague Rabbi Aaron Alexander says Tzafra Tava. Good morning in Aramaic. So Tzafra Tava, everybody. All right, we're on page 275, and we're going to. You'll see the little note at the top. We're going to start. A new subject, and so let me just kind of back everybody up for a sec. We're jumping into a new thought, which is good for everybody. And the conversation we were just having is basically the Gemara says that the month of Nissan is also is a new year for leap years. Counting the months of the year for leap years and for the collection of shekels that are collected in Adar for the temple and for the renting of houses. And so one of the conversations that comes up is, well, how come this wasn't in the Mishnah when we read it in the first place? And I'm just going to read because I think it would be useful. I'm going to read for you what it says in the Mishnah, just the beginning, so we can kind of start out on the same page. And this is what it says. There are 4 New Years. The first of Nissan is the New Year for kings. And this is the date for the king's rule, which we talked about for quite some time. And the first of Nissan is also the New Year for the order of the festivals, which we also spent a long time on. So here, we're sort of in conversation about other things that the month of Nissan is the first of the year for. Or the first of Nissan is the New Year for, which is probably a better way to say it. So, what we just talked about on the previous page, at the beginning of 7a, was the question of Nissan as the first year for months. And so we had this whole conversation about, well, why is Nissan the first month when we count months? So if you look at your chart here for a sec, I know I have extras here. If you look at this chart, Nissan is our first month. That makes Adar the 12th month, and Tishrei the 7th month, and sort of the way we normally count the months, at least to the modern age. That's the conversation we had last time, which is how do we know that Nissan is the first month of the year? Is everybody with me so far? And there was all sorts of conversations and proof texts and stuff like that, and we sort of ended it resolved. Now,
I think we know it's because Adar is definitely last month.
How do we know that?
Because that's where the
And why is that?
So that your son is
No, it's the right question.
But it's for Pesach.
Right, Passover. So Passover is probably our harder post in the year in the land that is the year. But the question is the right one, which is how do we know any of these things? We rely on previous knowledge, and in the case of the Gemara, we spent a lot of time on biblical verses to sort of prove our texts. Today, we are going to ask a different question, which is how do we know that the first of Nissan is is a new year for leap years? That's where we're going to start. And so I want you to just look at the Aramaic for a second. If you look at the second line, first word, it says Ve'ha-tanya. And so we for sure know the second half, which is Tanya, which tells us what? It was taught in a Baraita, exactly right. We're on page 275, or halfway through 7a. So we know that it's a Baraita, but when you see that hey at the front of it, the Hatanya, it actually is introducing a question. Right. So wasn't it taught in a Baraita? So you always have to be looking for where the end of the question mark is there, right? Because we know that there's a question. Okay, everybody with me? And then another just good Hebrew phrase that we should all know is if you look at the second to last line, right in the middle it says Va'af al pi chen. And it's translated here as even so. And that's a good thing. Af al pi, even so, is something you will see a lot. sort of as a leading to a conclusion, but not always. All right, everybody with me so far? Wonderful. All right, can I get a volunteer?
Yeah, they say despite that.
Right. So there's a bunch of versions of it that also mean slightly different things. All right, can I get a volunteer to read in the English? It was taught in a Baraita.
Here, I can read today.
Go for it, Dee.
It was taught in the Baraita. On the first of Nissan is the new year for leap year.
All right, I'm gonna pause you. All right, let's just take a moment and define leap year. I am not gonna make you read the bottom of the page, Dee, where it's even smaller, and I will read it instead. It says the following at the bottom of the page. The Jewish calendar follows a lunar cycle of 12 months of 29 or 30 days each. It is also related to the solar calendar because the festivals must occur in their appropriate seasons. Right? That was your point about Passover. In particular, Passover must be at the time of the barley harvest and Sukkot at the time of the autumn equinox. The solar year is slightly more than 11 days longer than the lunar year, which if you remember we spent a ton of time on in terms of how many days the year was. To compensate for this difference, a 13th month is occasionally added so that there are 2 months of Adar. During the period when which is like this year, we are now in Adar Bet. Like the last day or so. During the period when the calendar was set every year by the Sanhedrin, which was like the rabbinic court of its time, the question of whether to add an extra month required a unique decision-making process. First, the matter was considered by 3 judges selected from the Sanhedrin, which had about 70 people. If they thought an additional month was necessary, 2 more judges were asked to join the deliberations. If this body also agreed, 2 more judges were added, bringing the total to 7. These judges would make the final decision. In addition to the need for the festivals to fall in their appropriate seasons, the judges also considered the climatic conditions and whether the crops had ripened sufficiently. Since the 4th century CE, the Jewish calendar has operated on a fixed astronomical system using a 19-year cycle, correlating the lunar and solar calendars. Leap months are added in the 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th, 14th, 17th, and 19th years of each cycle. Everybody with me? There's a test at the end. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's interesting. I always imagine when it comes to something like this, it's like those little, they're not toys, but those tools where when you crank them, you see the planets sort of spin around. I imagine the calendar is kind of like that with the Jewish calendar. Every 19 years, you see things are switching into different places, in and out. That's how I imagine. Very mechanical.
So
It's amazing how they came up with that.
It's amazing.
But I love the idea that before that, you had to have all of these levels of judges and numbers of judges, and that they took into account what was actually going on in the world, in the agricultural life of the community. Because if the crops hadn't ripened, how are you going to have the barley harvest?
It might be as a result of climate change, we need to change because the barley harvest changes.
Yeah, I mean, just
God forbid.
So the Sanhedrin doesn't go back that far.
right.
I don't remember how far back it goes. It's not that far.
It shows up in the Mishnah. So at least the 2nd century.
But the roots of the roots of the lunar calendar probably go back way back before the solar calendar, which probably goes back at least 5,000 years. And
A multiple solar calendars.
the math governing the solar calendar and its relationship with the lunar calendar, I believe, I don't have the specific knowledge, but I'm guessing that math was worked out before the Sanhedrin came into existence.
Well, so there are multiple solar calendars for sure, but I think the point of keeping Passover from drifting too far, right? If it starts in the 3rd year and it's 11 days apart, right? That's about a month on average, right?
So the solar calendar was used for something.
Right.
One of the things it was used for was to keep the lunar calendar in track the solar calendar.
You need an extra calendar to get your real calendar to work.
But our founding fathers, for whatever reason, decided to use the lunar calendar.
All right, so where are we now in this 19th year?
I actually don't know the answer to that. This year is a leap year, so it's one of those years.
7 choices.
We don't know which one, right?
Can I just ask something? Is that they were doing this up until the 4th century CE?
No, it says since the 4th
So
century.
your smartphone doesn't come up with ding, you're in the 6th century.
No, but he's gonna look it up.
But there was no Sanhedrin there. I mean, there's a gap where the Sanhedrin.
So that Sanhedrin was probably between the 1st and 4th centuries there. It'd be my guess. Right, because the rabbis started loosely in the 1st century. Things didn't get written down until the 2nd century. So there was a couple hundred years where this was probably in motion in terms of having judges and things like
The
that.
Sanhedrin is pretty well gone by the time of the destruction of the temple, right?
Probably. But the rabbis are also writing about sort of their imagination along with it. But how they would imagine that the Sanhedrin was working, even if they were not actually in the
Because the weather in Jerusalem was a lot different than the weather, say, in Babel, where
Right.
they were in the seat of where the stuff was
Sure.
different.
I would imagine spring was still spring, right? Because it's about seasons more than it is about climate, right? So we still more or less know when the seasons are, plus or minus, right? So winter, I grew up in Portland, right? So the winter in Portland and winter in Pittsburgh, probably not that far apart from one another.
We just had the discussion.
We did. That's why it's fresh in my mind. Okay,
Okay, so then, all right, yeah, that makes sense.
nice.
Okay.
All right, did you find anything yet? All right, we're gonna move forward while you peruse.
Here, I thought all of you would have that right at the tip of your finger.
I know, it's crazy.
I am disappointed.
It's a great. What can I tell you? All right, D.
We got another cycle before you become sage.
Do we really count leap years during Nissan? But isn't it tried and true though?
There's our Vahatanya. Keep going.
The court may declare a leap year before Rosh Hashanah, and if they did declare a leap year before Rosh Hashanah, the declaration is not valid. It's not considered a leap year.
Okay, so let's just make sure we're clear. We're not allowed to declare a leap year. Which Rosh Hashanah are we probably talking about? The one in Tishrei. Right, we're talking about a lot of New Year's, a lot of Rosh Hashanahs.
3rd year.
We're in the 3rd year. All right, there you go. In your 19-year cycle, we're in year 3. So, we're not allowed to declare a leap year before Rosh Hashanah and Tishrei. And if they did, it's invalid. Keep going.
But due to pressing circumstances, religious persecution, it may be declared immediately after Rosh Hashanah. At that time, the sages may declare that the coming year will be a leap year in accordance with their calculation. Sorry. Even so, the additional month added to the leap year can only be a second Adar. In what sense, then, is Nissan the new year or leap year?
Great, thank you. So, we learned we're sort of not allowed to do it before Rosh Hashanah, except when we can, right? And there's a persecution
But then you have to do it
concern,
right after.
right? Or it gives us until right after. What else did we learn?
Well, it says here leap year is the second of Adar. That
Right.
has to be Adar.
There's no second Tishrei, right? It's only the second Adar. So I want to, because there's so much of this knowledge we're not like sort of intimately with all the time. Let's take a look at the note on the top right. Can I get a volunteer to read that? D. All right. It's due to pressing circumstances.
Due to pressing circumstances, it may be declared that the reason that the leap year may be declared immediately after Rosh Hashanah only in pressing circumstances is that the decision to make a leap year is based on 3 primary considerations: calculation of the equinox, weather conditions, as we talked about before, and the ripening of the crops. On Rosh Hashanah, the decision must be made based solely on the calculation of the equinox, since the future weather and agricultural situation for the winter months will still be unknown.
All right.
That makes
That
sense.
tells you that they knew about the solar calendar.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we had a whole discussion about it in the Gemara itself, about how many days, so they for sure had the solar calendar, right?
So the equinox September 21st or something like that.
Primacy of the solar calendar. But we're continuing to use the lunar calendar.
So what I think is interesting about this, according to the read here, is that on Rosh Hashanah you don't have as much information as you have at a different time of the year, right? That we want more information, because if we know how the crops are doing, we can have a better sense of how, when the seasons are and the calculations thereof. Okay.
Wait, why do we want to do it based on religious persecution?
So it's a really fascinating. So the phrase is mipnei hadachak, right? Dachak is like pressing circumstances, and it doesn't say religious persecution. It's like as an example of religious persecution, right? So an example where this will show up. Another way this to show is sha'at hadachak, pressing time, would be the ruling that you can light your menorah in your house as opposed to outside, is because it was dangerous to light your menorah outside to let people see you.
Yes.
That's an example of religious persecution. Same concept, but not for religious persecution. The pressing circumstances were, we don't know, right, or whatever it was.
They screwed up the previous year.
They couldn't get enough judges, who knows, right? All right, so the question becomes, we have this whole conversation, why should a leap year be counted by Nissan, right? By meaning sort of in respect to.
We have to start somewhere.
Gotta start somewhere. Okay.
So
I wanna,
wait,
yeah.
I have a question. So the issue is not whether you do it after Rosh Hashanah, but how far after Rosh Hashanah you can declare it, because this thing says it may be declared immediately after Rosh Hashanah. But the rule is still that you can't declare it before Rosh Hashanah.
Right. So I think the question
So
becomes,
is it whether that you declare it on Rosh Hashanah, except if there's pressing circumstances, and then you can wait until immediately after? Is that the
so my understanding is that the Gemara wants to count around Nissan. It's the beginning of the year. We're going to decide for the whole rest of the year. So I think it's like you can start making the decision and you can stop making the decision. And I think the last end is Rosh Hashanah, not the first part. Does that make sense?
Right, because Rosh Hashanah takes, it's a several days thing.
Yeah, but I also imagine that they're not wanting to go through this whole judging process on a single day in the fall. They want it to happen in the spring, when they might have more information of how the rains are doing or how the crops are doing.
Yeah.
That's my impression.
But I guess, okay, so my question is, that the first rule says that you can't declare a leap year before Rosh Hashanah. But what's not clear is when after Rosh Hashanah.
Right. Or how far before.
No, you can't declare it before.
Well, so basically you're suggesting that what this means is from the 1st of Nissan until Tishrei, for 7 months, we're not allowed to declare a leap year?
That's what my
Right. I think there's a period of time before Rosh Hashanah, and it doesn't go all the way back to Nissan.
Okay.
I think they're saying, please don't make it around Rosh Hashanah unless you have to. That was the impression I got, but I could be wrong.
I guess I wasn't.
Yeah. Let's come back. Let's keep reading because maybe it'll be clarified. If not, we'll say, because I'm not sure. Your point is well made.
Nothing is clarified.
Maybe it'll help us better understand the question. How's that?
Right.
All right. The thing I want to point out to you in the Aramaic is on the second line of the next paragraph. Ditnan. Really similar to Titania, but not the same. What do we know from Ditnan? What does that mean?
Where are you seeing it?
is second line in the Aramaic, right in the middle. Ditnan. Anybody remember?
First paragraph?
Second paragraph.
It's got something to do with Todd.
It has something to do with Tot. You're absolutely right. What else?
Can't go any.
Can't go any further.
Does it have anything to do with what's coming before, the words before it or after it that I don't know?
It definitely has to do with the words that are coming after it. It means it was taught in a Mishnah.
I'm close.
So.
I cheated to figure that out. Because the sort of shot tells you it's a mission.
Oh, nice.
Right.
Rabbinical school wasn't the cheating, is what you're saying. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, yeah, I've been a rabbi longer than you, and I still don't know the answer to this question.
So
70 years you've waited to learn the answer to this one.
So Ditnan, it was taught in the Mishnah. Why is that? Let's just take a moment. Why is that a relevant thing for us to know? Why is that relevant for us to know?
That it's a Mishnah?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna guess, but
Yeah.
typically when you throw this, it's weird. When you throw Mishnahs and Markiz at each other, typically Mishnahs win or have a lot of authority that you have to cover.
Yeah, they have a little bit more weight, right? And we're gonna want to. The Gemara is gonna want to side with the Mishnah whenever it can. So it's relevant for us to know when something is taught from a Mishnah. Okay. Can I get a volunteer to read the next paragraph in English? Rav Nachman.
Rav Nachman?
Yeah, go for it, Mark.
Rabbi Yitzchak said, what is meant here by leap years? It means the end of the leap year. Once month of Nissan has arrived, the previous year can no longer be declared a leap year. As we learned in the Mishnah, they, Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Papias, testified that the court may declare a leap year all through the month of Adar. As there were sages who said, the year may be declared a leap year only until Purim. If the decision to declare a leap year was not made before Purim, then the year can no longer be declared a leap year.
Clarification?
Yes, because what it's saying to me is that okay, why would it be? So once you get to Purim, you are at a full moon, for one thing. And therefore, if you've gotten that far and you've been calling it Adar Rishon, then the next thing has to be Pesach because it's a month later. But if it's before that, that's what it's doing. Like that's the slide time.
Right.
Well, but also because when there's a leap year, Purim comes in the second Adar.
Right. That's what I'm
Right.
saying.
So in the first Adar, once you hit Purim and you've celebrated Purim, you can't then
you're
add.
done. You know, you go to Pesach. That's not good. But is that why Purim Katan exists? That's an interesting.
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean,
That's
it's
a
not,
great
it
question.
feels like it's connected somehow.
Sure.
Because you get to it and they would make the decision.
Well, Purim Katan is later, isn't it?
No. It's the dates. It's the dates of Purim, but in the
But you're
first
thinking-
It's the full moon of.
Oh, I'm thinking of Pesach Sheni. That's my fault.
Adar.
Right, which is why I don't understand this. Is that I would think the maybe I'm totally misunderstanding everything. Maybe May Purim would make sense, but like odd Purim, like you've already bought the costumes for your kid, you've already baked the hamantash, and then the rabbis go like, wait, we're actually gonna impregnate the year and move Purim off a whole nother month. That can't be possible, right?
Right. So wait a
Show up
second.
at the Megillah reading and with the kids in costume, and then the rabbis are like, wait. It's a 13-month year, we're going to do it in 30 days.
So I think there's two resolutions. One is now we understand the Rosh Hashanah thing, right? Which is it has to be after Rosh Hashanah.
What happened?
It has to be the declaration of a new leap year. It has to be after Rosh Hashanah, between Rosh Hashanah and Purim. Is sort of what we've learned so far.
So we'll throw the
Right?
whole year off with everything.
Correct. Why does Purim make sense? Like why Purim seems like a reasonable breaking point because if you did it after Purim, you already missed the point. Like you can't. Adar 2 is the real Adar.
You can't wait till the last possible minute, right?
It is sort of crazy.
You need at least an 18-minute.
To run to the store to get new porn costumes?
But so, okay, so wait,
I look at it like this. everybody who knows anything knows already that the Sanhedrin is going to declare it a leap year, but they haven't done it yet. They officially have the power and say, but everybody knows it's going to happen, and it's filtered down to the peasants even.
And that's how they then dress up their costumes.
It's a bureaucracy.
So you're making the argument that in this period of time, we're paying attention. We're waiting for the declaration of, is it a leap year or not? That doesn't sell it for Mark.
I'm thoroughly uncomfortable, and I've always been with this whole idea that the rabbis, and there's a famous story that I remember from this, the rabbis dispatch several rabbis to go and investigate and decide whether they're going to do a 13-month year, as opposed to what we do now, which is we do it 7 times every 19 years. Like, the 7 times every 19 years part I'm okay with. The way they used to do it just makes me
By the way, clearly it made them crazy too, because then they made it 70 out of 19 years.
Right, but this makes me even crazier.
The man governing the Hebrew calendar and the solar calendar is absolutely worked out. I checked it. It's absolutely worked out long before this period in history. The only thing left for the Sanhedrin to weigh in on was when the crops were ripening. And everybody knew that.
Wait, so I want to go to Doris and then.
I'm going to object to that.
So I think that it all has to do with the agricultural issue, because you can wait until, say you're trying to decide, a bunch of rabbis and lay people, and you're kind of like, oh my God, and then when you get to right before the full moon of what you've just been calling the dark, then you look around and you see, how are the crops doing? Are they actually going to be, is there going to be enough barley to be harvested on Pesach? And if not, folks, this full moon is not good.
It's like the last possible second.
That's right, the last possible second, and so that's where we get the idea of Purim Katan. We'd like to call it Purim, but we can't.
Is it really the crops? That's like the...
Well, that's the argument Doris is making. Yeah.
And I think, George, that a lot of these references are not to, this month is this month because of where it is in the agricultural sector. The other point I want to make, though, is that we want to accept for the fact that even with this 19-year cycle, this I discovered while I was looking up the year, the year drifts about 1 day per 260 solar years. Right?
How many solar years?
216. Unless you're looking at the Julian calendar, which is 232. Right? But the point being is that even with this correction, the dates drift. And so, what that means is like Pesach is then a week and a half later than it was back in the days of the Talmud. 8 or 9 days. So I think that part of this is also saying that the rabbis recognize that even with the math, it might not be precise, and there might be times when you've got to correct that to keep Pesach from falling in June.
They absolutely knew about the quarter day also. Let me give a modern day analogy. It's not a great analogy, but it gives you the flavor. So tax day is April 15th. Everybody has to get your taxes in by April 15th, except there's an exception. The exception is if April 15th falls out on a weekend, in which case it's pushed back to the Monday. Now, we know this is going to happen. The IRS will push it back to the Monday. It's absolutely guaranteed, except we don't know for sure until the IRS declares it.
That's a really good analogy.
And it actually fits into something.
Yeah, but have they ever
Because
not?
that's not the only exception.
That's I think why the analogy, but that's why the analogy works perfectly.
Exactly,
The
because they
assumption
never-
is
they
everybody
will,
in
because
Israel
they
knows
always
this is
do.
going to be a pregnant year, but they don't. We have to wait till they actually declare it. The crazy part is they can actually wait to declare it until like a week before.
So the Gemara speaks to that next.
The IRS officially has the power. The Sanhedrin officially has the power. But everybody knows it's going to happen.
But however,
Yeah.
aren't there stories in Gemara or about rabbis actually having major fights about.
Yes, they were over the declaration of a new month. Right, which day? Right, that was the which day the new month starts on. But I think that's a smaller scale.
Oh, I think it's just as important. Whatever.
Go for it.
Well, because it determined the entire cycle of the month. So there's this famous thing about how the rabbis had to go out and declare the new month, and then once that declaration was made, you lit a bonfire and went from hilltop to hilltop from Jerusalem all the way to Babel.
Imagine Lord of the Rings. Go
Right, exactly. Key moment. What did we do before that movie? Like, we couldn't even explain that to people. That's crazy. Like, no.
You physically had, you literally had to bring witnesses.
Right.
I mean, this was not a done deal without the witnesses.
Right. So it's like, but it feels to me like, I don't know.
So here's the distinction, and I think it's an important one, which is, I think of the rabbi at this time, right? The new month, where months, their lengths hadn't actually been calculated and decided on like they are now. It's the same issues, right? The reason why I said it was a smaller scale was because we're talking about a day or two, one or versus a whole month. But I think it stands as just as important.
But the basic principle I was just trying to express was, even though you might say it's a foregone conclusion, like they really did send out rabbis to say, like, actually the new month starts on Tuesday, not Wednesday, and you don't know that until the rabbis come back with their report. There was no foregone conclusion with the new month.
So it's a ceremonial thing.
I'm saying it's not. I'm saying you might be able to make that argument with the Sadar, the 13-month year, the leaf month year, but you can't say that with months, because the rabbis really did regularly come back and say, like, no, it's...
We were wrong.
Right.
It's actually
really
a new moon tomorrow.
And we know that because there's a story in Rosh Hashanah about it, but it's a famous story.
Yeah, there's a famous
winds
story.
up leading to...
They would burn extra fires, or like people would mess with
It's the whole
stuff.
reason. No, it's the whole reason why we do a second day of those holidays in the
Right.
Samaritans who didn't go by the rabbinic ruling would sometimes light the fires to throw people off.
Right.
So
Oh my God, they can't throw them off. Then Yom Kippur could come up on Shabbos and they'd be screwed.
Not everybody waited to see the fire before they lit their fire. There were exceptions.
I'm sure there were. All right, let's get back to the text. So, very first 2 words of our next paragraph, paragraph 3, is my tama. Does anyone remember what that means? It's in your other notes.
In my other notes. It's a why something.
It
Why
is.
just doing it?
Yes. What is the reason? Nice job. Nice job. It's amazing.
We did that in a couple weeks. In
Yeah, I
4
know.
years, and Beth Shalom didn't.
All right, so we know that there's going to be a question about reasoning here. Can I get a volunteer to read the paragraph? The Gemara explains.
the Gemara explains the dispute. What is the rationale of the one who said that a leap year can be declared only until Purim? It is since the Master said, one asks about the halachot of Passover 30 days before Passover. Immediately following Purim on the 15th of Adar, people already began to immerse themselves in the halachot of Passover, which occurs on the 15th of Nissan. Were the court to declare a leap year after Purim, the festival of Passover would then be delayed for another month. In that case, there is concern that people will come to demean the prohibition against leaven bread and not observe Passover on its new date in the proper manner, which is exactly what it's arguing.
Right. So this is not necessarily a resolution to Mark's issue, which is what about the costumes? But it's the flip side, which is what about Passover, right? What's also interesting is what was their concern about Passover?
That you need to have the proper grains for your unleavened bread.
That's not what they said, though. They would not demean the prohibition against leavened bread, right? There's like sort of an emotional attachment here, right? We want the appropriate honor given to this holiday. We don't want people to be screwing it up or to be getting bent out of shape.
Well, the preparation for Pesach was so intense.
Right.
The whole thing there is, you didn't get the memo about the extra month. You're celebrating Passover at the wrong time, right?
Right. Exactly right. So this sort of is why it can't be after, but it doesn't necessarily resolve Mark's question of the day of. Can it be Purim, Erev Purim? My guess is probably not, but even still. Okay, so that's one answer, right? We have a dispute here, which is...
So wait,
yeah.
there's another piece to this, which is that Pesach is a Torah holiday and Purim is not.
Okay.
I feel like that's kind of...
We want to give more weight to Pesach than
Yes,
Purim?
that's right.
I think that's pretty reasonable. I also want, so let's just step back for a second, right? We're having a disagreement here. The first one is Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who's saying that Nissan is the first month. Remember, the question we're asking is, why is Nissan the new year? Why is Nissan the new year for leap years? That's what the Baraita said. Why is that? Why are we asking that, right? And so one answer is, but Rav, we got really off track. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says it's the end. It's the end.
Other problems that we haven't resolved, but let's get back to the original problem, which we haven't resolved.
Right.
Okay.
But I only say this because we're starting to see two sides show up, and I want to make sure that we know which side, what the thing you're on the sides of. So one answer is, why is Nissan relevant here? Is because it's the end of the year. The second thing that we're resolving is the declaration of the leap year around Adar. No,
wait.
Hold on, I take it back.
Not that Nissan is the end of the year.
It's what is meant by a leap year.
The Exodus. Right. I mean, Adar would be the end of the year.
Right. So it says what is meant by leap years. You're right. I stand corrected. It means the end of the leap year. That's what it talks about. Because remember, this is all. The first question, the primary question, is about Nissan. And then we said, okay, Nissan is the new year for leap years. What do we mean by leap years? Rav Nachman says the first thing is we need to know that it's the end of the leap year, right? Adar is the last month. The second thing we learn, according to the Mishnah, is this whole thing about until Purim. And then the question is, well, why are we waiting until Purim? One answer is because we don't want people to get messed up for Pesach. Now we're going to hear, I just want to make sure we were tracking the thing. Now we're going to hear the other half. Ve'idach, that's what it says in the Aramaic there. The first word of the next paragraph, ve'idach, is and the other one. And so we know that we're seeing two sides of something. Can I get who hasn't read yet? Joe, go for it.
And the other sages, Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Papayas, who are not concerned about this, what do they say?
Because if you look two paragraphs up, they're the ones who are quoted in the Mishnah saying you can declare a leap year all through the month of Adar, right? Which would be until the end of the year. And we got moved backwards to Purim 2 weeks. Keep going.
They say that people know that a leap year is dependent on the calculation. And they will assume that the sages did not complete the calculation until now, after Purim. Since this is a matter of common knowledge, there is no concern that declaring a leap year at that late time will lead to a disregard of the halacha of Passover. And I just want to say I did not read ahead.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive.
Right? So I think there's an important thing here, right? Which is, first of all, the rabbis are fundamentally considering the human condition. Through everything we learn, there is an attempt to try and understand how human beings actually work. And here, which is, everybody knows it's a calculation, it's written down somewhere, and we're not going to worry about whether people are going to get bent out of shape about Passover, because people know. It's in the calendar. Yeah, Joe.
I'm going to go out on a limb here.
A big limb. Don't take
You can stop me.
Don't take a saw.
So it's human. There's something about humans. I'm right, you're wrong. This is true, that's false. But we live in a gray world. Things really are not the way they seem to be. the concepts of this is the way we did it and that's not the way we did it, it's not that clear. First of all, the tradition is that in the time of David, the kingdoms were united and the temple in Jerusalem was the sole religious authority. We all know that it wasn't that simple. I mean, we have here, hundreds of years later, the Samaritans lighting fires on the wrong day. Not really to confuse us, because that's when they did it. The Gemara is trying really hard to make the world in Judaism, what we call Judaism today, black and white. And I don't think it was. It really wasn't. There were altars on top of a lot of high hills, and people were still using some of them here.
They didn't have Homeland Security to take down all those fires.
Let's cut these founding fathers, these learned people, a little break here for human frailties. And if we understand the questions and why they were asking the questions, that's probably as far as we're going to get.
But that was another thing.
Lots of
Did they
shade.
celebrate Purim twice then?
So that's an interesting question.
Because if they're declaring it after Purim, is that where we get Purim Katan now? Because they
That's a really
celebrate-
reasonable question, which is, if it's not declared until the end of Adar, that we have another Adar coming, then we read the Megillah for nothing.
Right, that's,
Plus, again, the timing for Passover is going to be
Right.
off.
Instead of Passover being in 2 weeks,
It's gonna
it's
be in
now
6 weeks.
in 6 weeks. Well, yeah.
yeah.
It's a really good question, right? I'm already cleaning out my house with 2 weeks left.
And people then get confused because they think there's
Right.
no point.
Then they have to bring all the stuff back to make Hamantashen, right? So I think
What's the Tashin
So I think
isn't gonna make it.
I think you're asking a good meta question that's worthy of exploration, which is, what is the fundamental goal of these rabbis? Why are they doing what they're doing? And I think the answer fundamentally is they are trying to do the best to serve God and the people of Israel as best as they can, with the knowledge that people are people and that we're going to make mistakes. The goal is to do the best we can with what we have, and not to get too upset about it. To do our best. I think that is. I mean, I'll admit I come with that worldview anyway. But I think that's what the rabbis are trying to accomplish. Meaning to say that we have a system, and they're sort of trying to figure out how to make it work. Now, I make another argument sort of in parallel, which is my guess is they already had a system that they were trying to rationalize. They were already probably extending things until Passover was at the right time, and they tried to make sure that the math worked. Don't celebrate Pesach today, do it in a day and a half, because it'll work better in the calendar, right? I think there's probably, not in a malicious way, but in saying, like, we want to make this work, we want to make this feel rational and make sense. And so I have my instinct, not that I have any proof, but my instinct is to say that some of this stuff is they're trying to add reasons to things to make it work even if it didn't come. So I'll give an example, would be the kind of unintentional absorption of Jewish tradition of everything that comes around it. We want to make it work for us, right? And not just say, nope, that's not what we do, or we came up with it first, or whatever. It's saying, look, we live in society, and we do stuff, and we want to make sure that it works for us, and that we add intention or meaning to it. And I think that's a big piece of what we can learn from this here.
Well,
Yeah.
We need to respect how everybody's doing things. It's their own way, and we need to respect it.
Right?
so, and also, I think that the Babylonian calendar was a solar calendar. Is that true?
I'm not sure.
That's what and if so, then they really had, they had, even at the early days of the Second Temple, they would have come back from from Babylon, knowing the solar calendar and
Right, where they lived and where they served God
rationalize those
were
two
actually in sort of different timings.
because they might not have had to know that before there was a solar calendar. They would only have been looking at the crops. You see what I'm saying? It's like, in other words, the rabbinic system is based on the knowledge of two different,
Of more than one system.
more than one system,
Right.
whereas the older...
It's about a synthesis and a syncing as opposed to something else.
You need to sync up with...
Exactly.
We're just backing into what they said it means.
So I want to come together and just read the last little bit because I think it adds an important understanding of how Talmud functions. The Gemara asks, why didn't our Tana, which is the Tana is a name of the rabbi from the same period of time as the Mishnah and the Baraita, why didn't the Tana of our Mishnah, right, the one that I read at the very beginning, include the first of Nissan as the first year for as a new year for leap years? Right? If we go all the way back to the Mishnah, it's not in there.
For this and this
We got
and this
kings,
and this, but not-
right, and festivals, but this isn't in there. Why isn't it in there? The Gemara answers. He, the Tana, is dealing with years that begin on the first of Nissan, but he's not dealing with the years that end on that date. With regard to leap years, the first of Nissan is an end, not a beginning. So we sort of resolve the original question, and then we have the sort of meta question, which they had dealt with in the previous section also, which is, how come this didn't show up when we were talking this the first time? Why didn't the Mishnah say the first of Nissan is a new year for kings and for festivals and for months and for leap years? And the answer is what?
Because we weren't talking about Nissan, we weren't talking about Adar, we were talking about Nissan.
Right, so why?
And Nissan is the beginning of the year, not the end of the year.
Right, so the argument is sort of the opposite, which is that Nissan's really the end of the leap year. Because we're not really deciding it until...
Right. It has to have been decided before the first of Nissan. Therefore, when
Correct.
we get to the first of Nissan,
It's sort of too late.
no more leap year issue.
Correct, it's been
It's
decided.
been decided no more.
Right. And so there's an interesting conversation here happening inside the Talmud about itself, which is, why are we not talking about this when it seemed contextually appropriate? Or why wasn't this mentioned there instead of here? So I think it's important, I think, for us to recognize that the Talmud is sort of, I wouldn't say self-aware, but aware of itself. That it's written a certain way. Okay, we are...
I'm totally confused. I mean, isn't the first, if you're whether it's a leap year or not, the first of Nissan, are you going to say it's the end of the year or the beginning of the year? Why does leap year even make a difference?
Right, so I think the question, right, so the original Braita said, it's on page, hold on. It says here on page 273, which you have because you have your book open, it says, the sages taught in the Braita that expands on what was taught in the Mishnah. On the first of Nissan is the new year for counting of months of the year and for leap years and for the collection of shekels, which we'll talk about next week. And also for the renting of houses. So we have this Braita that says that Nissan is the first of the year for leap years. And we have to resolve that. Does that make sense? Yeah? And the resolution they basically have is, it's not really the first of the year. It's sort of too late. It's the first of the year for the next year, but by then it's too late for leap years. Does that make sense?
Right. So the first
So
of
the first of the year, you can't go this year and...
I can't go backwards. Right? On April 19th, I can't say, oh, by the way, tax day was a couple of days ago. I have to do it in advance.
Say it with your word.
it's like backdating a check. I mean, saying you voted on this day, you actually did.
Right. So they're sort of doing that, but there's a line. There's like a hard stop. Right? A hard stop. Nissan is too far. Does that make sense?
I'll read it again.
Okay. All the best learning happens upon review. Okay. Next week we will pick up on page 276, and we will learn about the new year for the collection of shekels. And I just want to point out how awesome I think this is, that the text we're learning is like perfectly suited for Purim, for this time of year. I mean, could not have planned it any better, right? It's amazing. It's amazing.